The movie initiates by portraying an idyllic and serene residential district, in which resides a seemingly perfect family, joyful and affluent materially. The patriarch is named Don, and his spouse is Mona. They are parents to 2 offspring, Allison and Andrew. Within this family, Mona rules with her domineering disposition, and her dictates must be adhered to. Their marital relationship is exceptionally strict, and everything must be planned according to Mona's desire. The life they lead is devoid of mirth or intimacy that a wholesome family should possess. In fact, Mona possesses an extreme insecurity concerning her children, demanding them to always emerge victorious in all endeavors, even if it necessitates unethical means. Any form of dissent or defiance would result in severe retribution from her. Don is indeed quite disheartened and discontent with this situation, exacerbated by Mona, who frequently rejects his advances. This is attributed to Mona being a highly ambitious individual, who meticulously organizes all aspects of life, including the time allocated for intimacy with Don. Don opts for forbearance and acceptance of his life circumstances, under the guise of maintaining familial tranquility. Regarding their occupational lives, Don holds the position of a manager in a fairly sizable furniture store. This establishment was erected with capital furnished by Mona's parents, implying that Mona is technically the proprietor of the store. One day, the store conducts a hiring event for new staff, and a woman by the name of Dusty presents herself for an interview at Don's store. Don seems to have been smitten by Dusty from their initial encounter. Further, Don's co-worker and neighbor, Lay, expresses his elation by simply advising Don to approve the woman's application. He further elaborates that they require a distraction to alleviate the stress of their strained marriages. Concurrently, a man who appears to have recently committed a murder views the TV advertisement for Don's furniture store, which is presently broadcasting. As it transpires, this man and his accomplices have commenced tracking Don and his wife's movements and activities. On the contrary, Don persists in spending mundane days with his spouse, and one of the gang members has been shadowing him to ascertain his place of residence. Until one day, he finally manages to escape from it all by engaging in an amorous liaison with Dusty. It is at this juncture that their rapport begins to deepen and become more intimate. Don and Mona's relationship becomes even less captivating as a consequence of this. Initially, everything proceeds smoothly for Don, and he is able to conceal his clandestine affair from Mona. Until one day, when Don's familial unit is hosting a festivity, Dusty imparts truly distressing news to Don that she is anticipating his progeny. As a result, Don is utterly taken aback to learn about this, since Dusty had previously ingested contraceptive pills. Dusty also refuses to terminate the pregnancy because she ardently desires to have offspring. Furthermore, she persistently urges Don to assume responsibility for their transgression. Don then proceeds to meet Lay and solicits his counsel regarding Dusty's pregnancy. As most individuals would do, Lay suggests to Don that he provide Dusty with a monetary sum in exchange for her silence, and for her to depart from Don's life. Lay believes that women such as Dusty are of the variety of gold diggers, who have a proclivity for blackmailing well-established men like Don. And what Lay stated is actually veracious, because it transpires that Dusty is a paramour of a gangster named Murphy, the man we witnessed earlier. In other words, Murphy assigns Dusty the task of enticing affluent men, so that they can acquire a portion of their wealth. However, this time it appears that Dusty genuinely harbors affection for her target. To condense the narrative, Don heeds Lay's counsel, and he subsequently proffers Dusty $13,000. Don then entreats her to terminate their relationship and refrain from encountering him again in the future. But Dusty refuses, as she feels akin to being treated as a... At this juncture, Don is truly apprehensive that his indiscretion would obliterate his household, result in the loss of his offspring, and of course, Mona would react in an uncontrolled manner. Worse still, the extortion does not cease there. For $13,000 is an insufficient sum for Murphy. Thus he now instructs Dusty to solicit a larger sum of $25,000 from Don. The sole predicament is that Don has absolutely no remaining funds, and is perplexed as to how he should address Dusty's persistent blackmail. Since he has no other recourse, Don ultimately decides to take the risk of being forthright with his spouse, and divulge to Mona everything he has done. Surprisingly, Mona appears somewhat composed and responds in a manner that Don does not anticipate. Instead, she inquires whether Don still loves her, to which Don responds that he loves her and their children immensely, and would do anything to rectify his mistake. Well, it won't be that simple, as Don will still have to contend with his wife's rage, where Mona begins to enumerate everything she has done, as well as all the opportunities she and her parents have provided him. This is the point at which Mona begins to unveil her darker side by ordering Don to terminate Dusty's life in order for her to cease extorting Don's finances. Mona declares that anyone who disrupts the unity of her family will face death at her hands. Dusty then contacts Don demanding the $20,000 in cash, which Mona insists he agree to. Mona presents Don with a difficult ultimatum: a separation that would sever his ties with his wife and children, or following her orders to eliminate Dusty. Don wrestles with the unthinkable act of taking a life, yet fears the possibility of losing his beloved family. The next day, Mona intensifies the pressure on her husband to commit the murder before Dusty arrives at the office for the nighttime retrieval of the money. Additionally, she has prepared a potent substance designed to terminate Dusty's life. Infuriated by Dusty's apparent fear, Mona persuades her to resist the forces threatening their family. With no alternatives, Don is compelled to comply with Mona's scheme, formulating a plan to initiate the action. Later that day, Dusty arrives and is received by Don, who offers her a tainted beverage. Consuming the drink, Dusty experiences a sense of unease as Don's behavior becomes erratic. Shortly after, the effects of the substance take hold, and Dusty falls unconscious. Mona then appears, instructing Don to place Dusty in the car's trunk. Upon returning home, Don remains overwhelmed by fear as he confronts the reality of their next move, further surprised to discover Dusty still clinging to life. Mona, however, finds amusement in Don's predicament. She instructs him to fetch the hammer, but when he presents it, she insists he rectify his own error and carry out the deed. Don, paralyzed by fear, confesses his inability. Mona, exasperated, orders him to open the trunk and relinquishes the task to herself. Dusty's body is then transported to the garage, where Mona embarks on the gruesome task of dismemberment alone. Don, unable to stomach the sight, flees to the restroom, overwhelmed by the situation and violently ill. Meanwhile, Murphy's suspicions escalate as Dusty remains missing for days without contact. The following day, Don returns home from work, panic surging through him as he observes Murphy conversing with his son outside their residence. As it turns out, Murphy summons Don for a meeting, demanding answers concerning Dusty's whereabouts. Don manages to maintain his fabricated story, claiming he gave Dusty the money and has no clue about her disappearance. Believing Dusty absconded with the funds, Murphy pressures Don to cough up another $20,000 by the next day, or his wife and child will face dire consequences. Upon returning home, Mona informs Don of a new plan. They must exhume Dusty's body and head to Dusty's place, where the gangsters reside. Mona, it seems, has a strategy to deal with them during the night of Don and Murphy's next encounter at the club. Arriving at the house, Mona broke into the gangsters' residence, finding it empty as the thugs were already partying at the club. Seizing the opportunity, she placed Dusty's remains, including the head she had severed earlier, into the refrigerator. Shortly after, one of the gangsters returned with a woman, and Mona swiftly dispatched them with a kitchen knife from the house. After their demise, Mona disappeared, and the surviving gangster contacted Murphy, informing him of the events that transpired at their home. Meanwhile, Mona used an undercover phone to call the police, reporting a disturbance coming from Murphy's house. Rushing to the scene, Murphy was met with the chaos Mona had unleashed. He discovered Dusty's body parts in the refrigerator. At that moment, he realized he had fallen into Mona's trap, with all the murder evidence pointing towards him. The police arrived, and his man was shot dead, but Murphy managed to escape through a secret door under the house. Later, Don, curious about his wife's past, tried to probe Mona about it. He suspected that a traumatic childhood event had influenced her current behavior. However, Mona's response took an unexpected turn, becoming highly emotional. She asserted that her parents were perfect and had never harmed her. Then she threatened Don that if he dared to ask that question again, she would murder and mutilate him just as she did Dusty. Following these incidents, Don was forced to live a life filled with paranoia and worry after hearing Mona's earlier threats. Mona's madness intensified, and she now plotted to get rid of Leigh's son, who possessed great physical strength and regularly beat her son in games. The next day, the police arrived at Don's house and informed him of his employee Dusty's death. The police also mentioned that they had apprehended one of the perpetrators, while the other remained at large. But for Don, the most significant piece of information was that someone had reported Don's presence at Dusty's lodge. Cornered, Don eventually confesses to the police that he had been having an affair with Dusty. Dusty's enraged boyfriend then demanded hush money from Don to keep the affair a secret from Mona. The officer, understanding Don's predicament, sarcastically remarks that he wouldn't want to discover another body if Mona found out. Their conversation is abruptly interrupted by a neighbor's dog darting into the garage, much to Mona's annoyance. She issues a chilling warning about the consequences of the dog trespassing on her property again. During Andrew's birthday celebration, Don makes a horrifying discovery. The neighbor's dog is now deceased and chilling in the refrigerator. Despite the unsettling turn of events, the festivities continue with a friendly competition between Andrew and Lazen. However, Mona disrupts the merriment by expressing outrage over the perceived unfairness of the game, accusing Leigh's son of using steroids. Witnessing Mona's cruel taunts towards the child's mother, who suffers from Crohn's disease, Dawn is appalled. Mona's vicious wish for the woman to shit herself to death leaves everyone speechless. Observing her brother struggling, Allison swiftly intervenes, grabbing the game controller and smashing the unicorn toy until it's broken. This action reveals Allison's position as Mona's favorite child, who consistently receives preferential treatment compared to Andrew. Don, heartbroken by the way his son is treated and fearing Allison's transformation into a mini Mona, decides to take action. To end the madness, he hatches a desperate plan. He deliberately creates an electrical short by turning off the power to the garage light fixture, hoping for a spark. Undeterred, Don devises a more drastic plan. After conducting some tests, he deliberately loosens the valve on a gas cylinder, allowing gas to fill the enclosed garage. He then coaxes Mona into retrieving some meat from the garage refrigerator, while feigning his own task of checking the grill. As Mona unsuspectingly enters the garage, Don makes a hasty escape. Inside the gas-filled space, a spark ignites from the opened lamp fixture, triggering a massive explosion that consumes Mona. In the aftermath, Don and his children have relocated to a new residence, finally free from Mona's oppressive rule and the ever-present threat of violence. They appear to be enjoying a newfound sense of happiness and freedom. However, the film leaves a chilling, open-ended conclusion. The police remain on the hunt for Murphy, the fugitive who escaped from his house. In the closing credits, viewers are jolted by the sounds of 2 gunshots, hinting at Don's potential demise at the hands of a vengeful Murphy. That concludes the recap of Home Sweet Hell 2015. Thanks for watching.